No, we do not want to record. Okay. Well, welcome everyone to a Browsers Bookshop event. We're so glad that you could be here tonight. My name is Andrea Griffith, and I'm going to introduce the speakers and the event that we're holding tonight. And I wanted to let you know that our website, browsersolympia.com, has copies of Anne's book. And Anne so wonderfully came in yesterday and signed all the copies that we had in the store. So we have signed copies, and you don't even, oh, yes. Thank you for this. Oh, I love this. We should take a picture. But we have signed copies in the store. Everything that we have right now is signed. So if you order from us, all your copies that you order in the next few weeks will be signed. So we're excited about that. I'm going to introduce Anne and Stacy, and then I'm going to turn my camera off and turn the conversation over to the two of them. There will be a time that you can ask questions, but we encourage you to engage in the chat throughout the entire event. And I will be monitoring the chat, and Stacy will be monitoring the chat, and we'll kind of organically involve your questions that you might have into the evening. And thank you again for joining us on this very, very rainy day, right? I lost power for like a hot minute, and and the store lost power for a hot minute. So I'm just glad that we all have power tonight. So I'm going to start with Anne's bio, and then I'm going to read Stacy's bio. So Anne Liu Kellor is a writer, editor, creativity coach, and teacher based in Seattle. A graduate of the Evergreen State College and Antioch University, LA, her essays have appeared in Yes Magazine, Long Reads, Witness, New England Review, Fourth Genre, Entropy, Literary Mama, and many more. Anne is the recipient of fellowships and grants from Hedgebrook, Seventh Wave, Jack Straw, For Culture, and Acacia in the Woods. She facilitates writing workshops across the Pacific Northwest and loves to support women and BIPOC writers in finding their voice and community. Praised by Cheryl Strayed as insightful, riveting, and beautifully written, Heart Radical is her first book. Stacy Scheel Hirsch is a resilience coach, organizational wellness consultant, and a trauma-informed mindfulness teacher based in Olympia. She is the founder of More Voices, LLC, a launchpad for creative projects and collaborations that aim to help the world live a more inspired story. Her projects include Life Takes Practice, which provides individual and workplace education for mindful, resilient living, and Pilgrimage Inside, an online free weekly meditation group. Additionally, she is the co-founder of Cultivate Retreats, a writing and meditation retreat for women. Although an introvert who loves solitude, Stacy enjoys bringing people together and believes in the healing power of a good book group. So thank you both for being here tonight and talking with one another.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much, Andrea. Thank you, Browsers Books, and thank you everyone out there in the internet world for being here with us tonight. I'm going to start with reading a short chapter called Learning to Speak. I'm actually reading the first two parts of the chapter, but those first two parts were the original piece, and then I ended up changing it for the book. So there was a lot of that kind of editing that happened, changing standalone pieces to work in the overall flow of the memoir. Learning to Speak. 1. As an infant, the first tones I heard were Chinese, the voice of my mother, the voice of my grandmother, the soft murmurs of the woman who held me and rocked me and sang me to sleep. Soothed by their voices, I drifted in a world without language, and yet I was already learning the sounds of Chinese, the voices of my ancestors passing again from mother to child, rising and falling, imprinting their memory in my cells. English, the language of my father, was also familiar to me, but it was less prominent, somewhere on the periphery, connected to the world outside the intimacy of my home. In preschool, I understood the language that floated around me, but I had little experience asserting myself within its midst. This world I was a part of and yet removed from. At first, my teachers were worried because I was so quiet. Then, slowly, I learned how to play and talk in English. One day, my teacher happily reported to my parents that I had been caught with the other girls peeking into the boys' bathroom. It was a sign of progress, but I never stopped being quiet. 2. After 3 years in China and living in America again for 2, I finally attend my first overnight meditation retreat. When we break silence at the end of the weekend, I am surprised by the sounds of others' voices, how the pitch and inflections of the woman who sat next to me do not match the person I imagined when all I knew was her presence, the way she entered the room, took off her shoes, and settled onto a cushion to sit. Her speech feels too human, somehow intrusive, and I wonder if mine will sound this way too. Once words are allowed, we feel pressured to speak. Nervous laughter, bristled edges of defense, or notes 1 octave too cheerful creep slowly back into conversations as we recall the task to assert who we are, to announce our individual selves, to form unique narratives and opinions. We return to old patterns, imitations of self, because words are worth more than quiet, or so we've been taught, because too many in this world have stayed silent. 3. Through silence, I've learned how to listen. Through silence, I can gauge when to speak. Through silence, I can sense when a channel to exchange meaning is open, or when I am caught in a volley of empty rounds. In silence, I remember how to give and receive, let go of the need to have something to say, the urge to cast myself in relation. Of course, silence can also suffocate, settling in my chest like layers of silt, a sign that I have waited too long. I want to speak now more than anything. I want to share my voice, my heart, my deepest self with my family, with the world. I want to let myself love and be loved with my whole being, but it still feels more comfortable to stay hidden. A web of gauze winds circles around my face, even as heart song trembles through my body. For years, I've gone on restraining, withholding. Yet the more I've learned to reveal, the less I can bear to hide. I am tired of being the quiet one, the one who bites her tongue to preserve the peace, to avoid the discomfort of confrontation. Slowly, steadily, a line has been drawn, a desire stretched taut across my throat, an old and tired seam splitting open. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. How is it for you reading that out loud?
You know, I've read that one many times, but it's always emotional in a new way because there's always some new layer of silence that I'm breaking in my present life, or some layer of voice that I need to access. So although I'm in a different place than I was when I wrote that many years ago, I can tap right back into it.
Yeah. I found something similar in reading that and then rereading it again for myself. That every time I went back to the different pieces, that I discovered also a new layer, both within your writing, but also within my own experience of what it means to find your voice, what it means to listen, what it means to be in silence. So I found that those layers are there.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And what about that, where you were saying, I want to let myself love and be loved, and find my voice, my whole being. Like how was writing this, how did that help you through writing? to find that voice.
Mm. For me, writing is always that first layer that I go to of breaking silence. The writing that I do daily in my journal, the writing that nobody sees. And like I said in the piece, for years, that was enough. I didn't say that in the piece, but this is what I'm explaining. For years, it was enough to just write it in my journal, to name my truth for myself. But over time, slowly, I wanted to be seen. I wanted my voice to be heard by more people. I have intimate, close friends, and that is wonderful. But it's taken me a long time to cultivate a larger community of friends and students and other writers, other activists, other people doing the hard work of their lives, and other people willing to be vulnerable and present. So while writing itself is a really powerful vessel, it takes sharing it with people for those things that I'm saying to fully metabolize in my body, and to fully own it and feel it, and feel like something is completing, a cycle is completing. Which is, I always tell my students too, when they opt to share in our classes, that they might be surprised by the amount of emotion that comes up through reading it out loud. They might think, oh, this is a topic that I've explored a lot, that I'm no longer emotional about, that I've worked through in therapy, what have you. But the act of sharing it in public, in a safe, trusting space, and the act of being witnessed and heard in community is so powerful, and it's so rare in our time, it seems. Maybe in all times, I don't know, but it feels like something that we really crave and seek, especially now.
Yeah, that desire, the wanting to be seen, to be witnessed. There's definitely more conversation about doing that for one another, for people, recognizing the importance of it. You're hearing people talk about it in different ways now.
Yeah.
And probably different than when you started, like when the stories from, many years ago, the stories from when you were first exploring these themes in your own life, and trying to, understand yourself better.
Mm-hmm.
And now, this conversation is still very relevant, and very, even maybe and more so as more people are having this experience.
Yeah, I hope so. I do feel that way. Like back when I was writing it, a lot of these ideas, or even just concepts around mindfulness, or around compassion, or around spirituality in general, felt more fringe. And now they're like integrated into science and workplace, and they're much more mainstream, and people, you don't have to explain what you mean when you're talking about the importance of these things. But that doesn't mean that collectively we're that much closer to actually living it and embracing it as a whole. It's just more at the surface that we're able to have that more common language to name in secular spaces,
right,
the spiritual elements of life that cut across all religions, right?
Right. It kind of reminds me of what you were saying when you were talking about your own path of, and at first you broke your silence by writing, and that was a process for you. And it feels like as a whole, we're breaking our silence by talking about it and, thinking about it. But there's this next step of getting out of our heads and embodying it, and moving into the embodiment of what we're sharing with words.
Yeah. And that embodiment is what I was learning in this time in my 20s, when the book took place. I mean, I'm learning it now too. But like, then I was so, yeah, it was just so hard for me to share myself, to speak off the cuff in public, to, to reveal more of myself. I was very inward and very afraid of being judged and very judgy of myself and of others, right? Yeah.
And that's what I loved about this piece that you shared tonight is there's so much, in the first part, thinking of that beautiful line where you say the voices of my ancestors, passing again from mother to child, rising and falling, imprinting their memory in my cells. There's this whole piece of, and you were really, talking about this ancestral part, this piece of your identity and the internal experience of this. And then on the periphery, there's this other culture and in language. And I was thinking about how, how culture holds, like in America, we're very extroverted overall. So, that place, like where's there a place for silence? Is there a place for silence? And that as a young child, being an observer or being more maybe introverted, that might have been seen as a problem. That there was something maybe wrong here, instead of here's someone who's looking inward. Here's someone who's embracing being an observer of life.
Right.
Is there room for that? Is there space?
Yeah. And I think that's what you're naming is what made me so fearful when I was younger, because that space of listening and like needing time to process what somebody has said, needing time to take it in, has always been a part of me. But like you're saying, I used to judge it and think that it was a weakness. And then conversations would move so fast that I didn't feel I could interject. So I always looked more towards one-on-one connection where there could be that equal give and take. But yeah, I think that is partly cultural, just and also just the way we're trained to be in space, like in a conversation. So often it's not actually a deep listening to each other. It's more like listening so that you can think of the next thing you want to say to respond, right?
Yeah. Again, being really in our heads and less in that embodied space of, feeling into the moment, what wants to be heard or seen.
Yeah, and I don't know how much of that in myself is just innate, and then also how much came from being raised bilingual, and that's part of this piece too, and that part of my question, right? How much of that early childhood language formation shaped me in going to, being in this familial space where one language is spoken, and then suddenly being in a public space where another language is spoken, and really recognizing how different that is and how there are these whole different layers through which I can express myself, but not having the language as a child to understand what that means, what that is,
Right. I want to also acknowledge that there's some things in the chat. So Jennifer says, so beautiful for the reading that you shared with us. And Haley and Dave both have hearts and applause. And then Laura says, needing or not needing to cast yourself in relation to. I'm thinking about this in relation to how I listen. Just thinking about how we listen.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Yeah, that's what I say to my students. Like when we listen to each other read our free writing, sometimes I often encourage people to not give feedback, right? Just to say thank you. Because when we're like trying to think of something to say, even if it's praise, how deeply are we taking it in, right? On this visceral level.
Yeah. It's Tamara says, Tamara, it's really powerful to witness you boldly sharing. I hope it's contagious.
Oh my gosh. I just have to say, I'm so glad, Tamara, that you're here. Tamara has a cameo, a very important one in this book. If you've read it, you know she was my accomplice in escaping my job. Yeah.
I did read that part.
Yeah.
We're not going there right now, but I did, and I loved it very much.
Yeah.
Anne says, love the concept of listening and silence as part of finding your voice. I thought that was really powerful too. How that contributes, how listening, being silent, and then coming up, like, how do you tap into, where does voice come from?
Hmm. Wow, these are deep questions, right? Where does voice come from? Wow. I mean, there's so many layers of that, right? There's the layer of that I know through writing of being able to drill ever deeper into naming my truths. And then translating that into conversation, right? Because sometimes these deep, profound ways that we write and process don't seem to mesh with our personality or how we speak in person. But I think the more you write and the more you, again, like integrate that deeper voice and knowing into yourself, then the more that that affects who you are in the world and how you show up with more presence, right? With more intention around what you actually want or need to say in any given situation, what words feel called for or what words don't feel necessary to say.
Mm-hmm.
How many times, you know, and like in Buddhism too, you know, this idea of right speech, but just this idea that, like, you know, there are so many times when we might be tempted to gossip or to criticize, and it can feel kind of fun, but like, how does that leave us feeling underneath, right? And how does that translate to then how our own self-talk, you know, how we do that to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I think finding your voice, and there is this deep relationship between noticing mindfulness and noticing what's the voice in our head too, right? What is the voice, the chatter in our head that is maybe barely perceptible at first, but the more we slow down and are present in our bodies, the more we can notice there's a lot of self-talk happening, and a lot of it is very negative and a lot of it is very critical. We do it to ourselves all the time, and we're so hard on ourselves, and we do it to others too. So I think somehow this is all related, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we slow down enough to find the true words.
Yeah.
Or even just to name the critical part, to name the parts of ourselves that we feel ashamed of once we actually name them, instead of just letting them be this unconscious part of our brains.
Yeah.
You know, shame can only live in silence. So that's a big part of my work as a writer, is trying to name those things that I'm afraid to say out loud.
Mm-hmm.
First for myself, and then eventually maybe it can find its way into a book, but it can take a long time, right, to get to that place.
Yeah. I thought that was beautiful. Beautiful answer. Yeah. Well, and I had written a note about finding your authentic voice in a noisy world. And when I wrote that down, I was thinking noisy world, like the external world. But, you know, as you're speaking, I'm thinking sometimes the noisiest part of the world is the conversation we're having on the inside.
Yeah.
And so if you can pause, like you said, through writing, name those pieces, it does create a new cadence or a new pace.
Yeah.
How we might speak to ourselves or show up in the world, and then how we express ourselves.
Yeah.
Teresa says, yes, shame can only live in silence. Very powerful.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, and we touched on this a little and I know you want to read one more piece, so I want to leave time for that. But I also wanted to ask, what makes right now the perfect time to be sharing your book? Where we're at in the world and kind of what's happening. Why is this like a great opportunity to have your book out there in the world?
Yeah, well, as you know, and as many of my friends know, it took a long time to get this out there. But I do feel like it's the right time for me to put it out here. On a personal level, even though the book focuses on a narrow period of my life, the themes that I'm exploring in it have still been spiraling through my life. And as we opened with this idea, learning to speak, a lot of how I've learned to cultivate my voice has been through teaching and through finding community with my students in particular, and with other women of color and other mixed race people, community that I didn't have and didn't even know how much I needed. And so I feel like I can speak to the themes of the book now and stand behind it and do all this promotion in a way that I would have been terrified to 10, 20 years ago, or just maybe not terrified, but I wouldn't have been able to do it in the same way that I am now. And in the last couple of years too, I divorced, and I needed to find some truths in myself through that period too, around my intuition, around my choices, around what I needed, around what my body knew, but I wasn't letting myself fully say in my mind. And so I was kind of living out some of the same lessons that I was living in my 20s, but in a totally new way. But I do feel there was something there, like once I was able to reclaim myself and my own solitary path, and separate from a partner that I had grown very dependent on, and started to be codependent with. That was an empowering place to return to again, and a really scary place at this stage in my life to go back out into the world without knowing my career path or how I would make enough money, and if there's going to be someone there when I die at my side, these huge questions that of course we never really know, but that divorce and any big life rupture or change brings to the surface. So I do think there's something there, like having to go through that again just made it like, okay, now or never, this is the time to put this book out. And so that's answering on a very personal level. On a global level, I don't know. I mean, maybe the world is, maybe this is a better time for the world to welcome my book, maybe also conversations around both mindfulness, spirituality, but also around race, all the different layers that the book taps into.
Yeah.
So
Thank you. Yeah, I think that piece around intuition, being able to trust your intuition, and it sounds like reading the book and then hearing how you responded just now to this question, that there's that intuition layer or whatever layer we're talking about, just it keeps coming around, and we can take with us what we've learned before. But we're gonna, live it in a different way. We're gonna ask bigger questions or deeper questions, and we can be informed by what happened before, but we're still gonna be, brought those opportunities to go a little bit deeper into it.
Yeah, I feel like we each have these core questions, core themes that, whether we're writers or not, that we're exploring through our lives with the with the families and the stories and the paths that we've been given, and that we do just keep drilling deeper into them in new ways. It's never just like, okay, I figured that out, you know.
Exactly.
Same questions, the same themes are going into like my next books and works, but in different ways.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Laura says yesterday was my 1-year divorce anniversary. So I totally feel you, Anne.
Congratulations.
Yeah. I know that we have another part of the book that you want to share, and I'd love to have you read from your book.
Yeah. Okay. So this passage is also from later in the book. It's in Refuge, towards the end of my time in China, when I was starting to question more what I was doing there. I miss my family, my friends, and my identity lived through English. And I miss my home near salt water and tall evergreen trees, long solitary walks, breathing fresh air into my body. I never realized before just how much I depended on wild spaces, or how I once took clean air for granted. In China, everything is coated with thick dust, and everywhere there are people. On sunny days, flocks of people gather in the city parks, by the river, in the tea houses, on the sidewalks, perched against railings, sitting on benches, squatting beneath any lingering tree, every spot of shade. The rivers stink, dead, stagnant water, shorelines draped with blue plastic bags and rubbish, and the water tastes like chemicals no matter how long you boil it. New slogans painted on the temporarily erected white walls that border construction sites proclaim in English and Chinese, blue sky, green grass, clean streets, friendly people. Or, let's do everything possible to maintain Chengdu's image as a clean, modern, and civilized city. The government wants to develop the West, its latest campaign, and Chengdu is its shining headquarters. Every corner shows the progress. In 1 week, a street is torn up and made over. Empty buildings are stacked in rows with fancy faux European-style pillars, cheap tiles, and tinted blue glass. Real estate billboards proclaiming in English, wonderful space, or Roman holiday, with pictures of smiling white couples, the ultimate in status. I try to imagine the old courtyard that Yizong grew up in, his tales of swimming in the Fu River and eating from peach trees, a mere couple decades ago. Now, only a few patches of the old city remain, a lane or two we occasionally stumble upon, like entering another era, sunlight streaming in, old impressive door frames, arched rooftops, quiet, dreamlike, before the street spits you back out into traffic on the other side. Maybe if I go back to America, I can find my old center of gratitude and prayer again. Maybe I just need a break. Maybe I've stayed too long, grown too dependent on cigarettes and alcohol for stimulation and release, too dependent on one person to fill my emotional needs. Maybe I'm too sensitive to live here for long, too permeable, too weak. If there is an inner peace that I can cultivate wherever I am, I have not yet figured out how. I still have so much to learn about how to take care of myself, how to trust in what my body tells me I need.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that last part is, I read and reread that part, and thinking about what that journey of self-discovery is like when you're in your 20s versus 30s, 40s, and how, kind of going back to that theme of shame, of how it was a very challenging environment in many ways. You discuss all the different ways it was challenging, and yet it was part of that exploration, that part of like wanting to understand yourself inside of this culture, this piece of you.
Yeah, and I did feel a lot of shame in a way about not being able to cut it there and just running back to my privilege. I mean, I was very aware of the fact that I was an American with a safety net with my parents, and that I could just leave. You know what I mean? That if I failed miserably, like I could go home, right? Whereas my partner at the time, who was from Chengdu, couldn't. You know, he was stuck there, and so it really did make me question a lot of the spiritual beliefs that I had around, oh, just, you know, follow your bliss and doors will open where you didn't know there'd be doors. Joseph Campbell. I loved that quote, but it didn't feel as true in mainland China, you know? And so I questioned a lot of that. And I questioned a lot of my naive idealism around like wanting to go there to help the people of Tibet and to be an activist or to be a translator or force for peace in some way, in a way that many 20-something-year-olds often, you know, want to change the world and find their path in this with a capital P. And you know, what my time in China really showed me was how weak I was, how vulnerable I was, how much I had yet to really discover and understand about my limits, how much I had depended on, you know, nature and being able to have all this solitary space, but also, you know, creativity and college and just learning environment around me, how much I had fed off of that to cultivate my spiritual beliefs and my sense of purpose. But once that was taken away from me, it was really hard to maintain my sense of prayerful connection to the universe, right? Like there was no giant cedar tree to like bow down before. It was just this gray, concrete, polluted city. And I struggled with that, but especially because I'm very sensitive and I'm an introvert and I don't enjoy crowds, right? And that's like crowds on steroids, plus the pollution, the level of like what we were experiencing with the fires here, you know, like last summer and the air quality, I realized that's what it was like every day in Chengdu. And everybody just, you know, adapted, and I would get sick every time I would return. I get a cold. But I was young enough that my body could take it. I don't think it could now. Mm-hmm. And it really felt like this sort of, I mean, coming from my very privileged world, it felt like this, like, you know, dystopian world now, looking back as far as the pollution goes.
Right.
Yeah. And the crowdedness.
Right. Yeah, it made me think of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, more than like you having a lot of privilege. And but it's like, well, when we do have privilege, what's possible, you know, and what if we work for equity, you know, so that that's equitably distributed, then people can have, or more likely to have, or just be open maybe to these conversations in different ways. Like what gets in the way of self-exploration, what gets in the way of knowing ourselves.
Right.
You know, and I think in this chapter, I really related because I did a lot of meditation and traveling in my 20s, and I struggled like the ways you described, and I was really hard on myself, and it just left me thinking about how are we using things like nature to regulate, you know, but when you're in your 20s, like if I would have written my story at that time, I would have also said, maybe I'm just too weak, like you did, you know. Like that's the only way I could see it, instead of, you know, oh, I need those things to help me regulate and stay healthy. But you don't always know that when you're on that early path of self-discovery. That's right. What the path is about.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, you know, weakness, and there's different words we can put to that, but if we want to just say vulnerability, you know, it's not as a negative thing, but as just a way of knowing our own sensitivity, and like you say, what do we need to regulate our bodies, because we're no good to anybody when we're in a anxious, shut down space. It doesn't matter what we write or think,
right?
If our bodies can't be receptive and open to the people right before us and to ourselves, and access of that heart space, you know. Absolutely. So that's what I come back to too, even now, and thinking about my own limits, my own limitations. I'm still hard on myself with like politics and activism. I still don't let myself off the hook. I still feel like there's always room to grow and do more, and to be open to what the world is asking of us, but I also now know through experience what I couldn't name then, because I didn't have these 20 extra years of experience, that growth takes time, and giving back to the world takes time, and all of this is happening. So we feel so urgent about things, rightfully so, because there's so much pain and heartache and so many urgent things to respond to. But ultimately, we can't force ourselves and our bodies to do what they're not ready to do. And so we have to just respond to, what can I do in this moment, and what is my body okay doing, and how can I keep that path alive day by day, so that a year from now, 5 years from now, 10, 20, 30, whatever, I can show up even more fully for my people, for my community, for myself.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I loved how you started that passage off with missing your identity lived in English. And that identity piece being, someone who enjoyed the Pacific Northwest and could recognize the gifts and the beauty and the healing power and the nourishment of where you came from, that maybe that you didn't see that here, but it was so clear then.
Yeah. I mean, so often we don't really know what we have until we lose it, until we're away from it. And that is, there's so many things messed up about America, but that is one thing when I compare to China, is that, we have way more access to wild space still, even though it's disappearing and needs to be protected, it's still just, we can't compare. So, and how much do we need that wild space to know, to feel who we are on this very, human and non-human level, right? On the spiritual level of being connected to the elements and nature and everything. I think that's so connected to how we, become present in our bodies and our senses, right? That is this non-human way as well, right? How are we a part of that?
Yeah, and I think of the research on, how being in nature is, helps us experience awe. There's other ways, but nature is one of those that you can almost feel if you drive out to the beach or to the forest and you step on the path. It's instantaneous. You just, even if you're not looking for it, it just strikes you.
Totally awe. The other ways that I experience awe are through creativity, right? So like dancing, and that became one of my only outlets in Chengdu. But even then, it was hard to lose myself in it because I was so aware of everybody watching me, that self-consciousness piece.
Yeah. I was wondering if you had time for one more piece, if we wanted to read that one chapter or that one piece.
I can read another excerpt and then we can turn it over to questions from the audience.
Yeah, that'd be great. Cassandra says, beautiful reading and conversation.
Thank you for coming. I love your book. Okay, so I'm going to read an excerpt from Popo about my grandmother, who has since passed, but she used to live in LA. Where is it? There it is. Okay, and this conversation is all happening in Chinese, but except for a few phrases in Chinglish. 可以安 Can you rub my shoulders? Oh, I should say, okay, so I was visiting her and I went to Antioch, the low residency program, MFA. So during those couple years, I got to see her a couple times a year more often and spend more time with her on my own, but she did help raise me as a child. Okay, Anne, can you rub my shoulders? Sure. Aunt Helen never gives me a massage, Popo sighs. Can you sit on this stool? She scoots over and I position myself behind her on a chair, digging my thumbs into her shoulders. On TV, images of exploding cars and soldiers flash in rapid succession. The right side, she instructs. Can we turn off the TV? You need to relax when you get a massage. Relax and close your eyes. Sindama, really? You shouldn't watch TV? She reaches for the remote. Yes, you need to breathe. I try to breathe slowly and audibly myself to help her slow her rhythm. She draws in a quick, deep breath. Deep yet shuddering, and exhales with force. Can you take off your shirt? She undoes the buttons on her blouse, revealing the straps of a beige bra. Her skin feels smooth and loose, but underneath lies a hardened mass of knotted muscles. Her body feels like her mind, braced in defense, as if on constant alert, waiting for an outside attack. After a few minutes, suddenly, she sits up. Hala, hala, ni leila. Okay, enough. You're tired. Really, I'm not tired. I just started. I'll let you know if I'm tired. Well, okay then. She leans forward. Right there, right there. I dig in harder with the pad of my right thumb, then stand and press my elbow into the spot. She winces. Oh, I lean all of my weight into that spot. When I release the pressure, she straightens again and turns to me. Do you ever cry? I'm surprised by her question. Well, sure, of course. Why do you cry? I don't know if I'm feeling suffocated or missing home. It's a release. It makes me feel better. Sometimes I also cry when I read about war or watch news. It can be so sad. Hey, ya, lang fei. What a waste. That doesn't have anything to do with you. You're sensitive, she says. Yes, I decide not to disagree this time. I often cry, she says. My life is so sad. When do you cry? Sometimes at night or when I'm sick and here by myself. That's the worst. Like that time when I called your mother at 3 a.m. So pitiful. How kalian. She shakes her head. I'm 83 now, you know, I'm old. Malaula. She sighs, dropping her neck slightly with the pressure of my fingertips. But you don't look 83. Pai ma pi. Don't try and flatter me. I laugh. Really, you are so healthy. What do you think? You should look like you're 40 or something? She chuckles. I am quite healthy. No one would guess you are 83. She nods and sits up again, her body tensing. My friend from church is in a nursing home. She frowns. She just sits there and doesn't recognize anyone. It's so sad. How kalian. Did you go visit her? She grimaces and shakes her head quickly. My friend told me. So pitiful, she sighs. Breathe, I remind her. She takes another quick breath, her body stiffening with the inhale, then slackening with the exhale. Her muscles are so incredibly tight, like a solid sheet of hardened rubber. Hala hala ni leila. Okay, that's enough. You're tired. I'm not tired. Really, I'm not tired, Popo. I dig in even harder with my thumbs, using my other fingers to grab and pinch large folds of skin. She winces, her eyes squinting. In a moment, she sits up again. Hala, hala, gola. Okay, enough now. You can massage me again tomorrow. You should go to sleep. You're tired. I finish with a finale of rapid karate chops on her shoulders. She moans in pleasure, then straightens. Go to sleep now. You're tired. You can massage me again tomorrow. Okay. I lean down and give her a hug. Good night. One an. Good night, she answers me in English. Wa aini. I love you, I say in Chinese. I love you too. She sighs and shakes her head. I've held you since you were a little child, you know. She reminds me, as she often does. Nitsurama, do you know this? I look at my grandmother's soft worn skin, her thin tufts of white and black hair, her compact frame so frail yet so tough. What's it all? I say. I know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There are many, memorable parts of the book, and I love that part. I went back and reread it, but it was mostly like the feeling it left me with. And I think I shared with you a little bit about the intimacy between grandmother, granddaughter, and we don't often think of intimacy in that way, but it was beautifully written, and I loved the balance of the knots in the shoulder and what's happening on TV, but then the softness that I felt you held her with, and in that relationship, and then the vulnerability of her questions for you.
Thank you. Thank you for pointing out that part to me earlier to read. And it just is a really reminder that, so much of the origins of my longing to speak Chinese better had to do with her, and then my longing to understand my family and myself better.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I'm just going to check. We have some people writing in the chat. Let's see. I think Jennifer says you're an incredible reader, Anne. I agree. Are you coming out with an audiobook? I might listen to you read it.
I am going to record one. Maybe next year I'll tackle that. But
that would be excellent.
Actually, I'll just say right now, my boyfriend and I are making an album. So I've recorded passages from the book, and then he's taught himself how to make electronic music over the pandemic. And so he's a musician. So he's laying down riffs and creating these songs, and it's going to be a Heart Radical album. So it's super fun. Yeah.
So fun.
Yeah.
I don't think that could get much more perfect. I love that. Well, you'll have to let us know when that's available.
Yeah. It'll be free, I think.
Yeah.
So
that's great. And Heather says, I love that. Thank you for the generous reading.
Oh my gosh, Heather, she was my editor. She helped me so much with this book. Thank you, Heather.
Nice job, Heather.
Yes.
Laura says, love that part. Teresa says, so touching. Wonderful dialogue. This is from Anne. Wonderful dialogue with your grandma. I recently read some of it to my memoir class.
Oh, yeah. I wrote that piece so long ago while I was at Antioch, and obviously edited it. But I gotta say, that's why I think it's so valuable to write down in great detail things that are happening now, because there's so much dialogue I never would remember if I wasn't just recording it as it's happening. So
yeah, I've noticed that there are some pieces I've thought about going back to write about, and I can't recall the dialogue. So I think just having that regular practice, writing it down.
Yeah. There wasn't much else to do when I was visiting my grandmother, but sit there and study her life and write down all the random things that happen. Does anyone have questions? I don't know if there's any. Let's see how much time we have.
We have a few more minutes. Nan says, so moving. And then Greta says, even more eager to read Heart Radical after hearing you read from it.
Oh, thank you.
So great. Yeah, so if you have questions, you can plug them into the chat. We'll see if anyone has anything for Anne. Thank you for doing this, Anne.
My pleasure. Yeah, it's just so awesome to get to talk about the book in new ways each time and connect with friends like you, old friends, to do so, and have all of you, so many of my students and fellow writers in the audience and family.
Well, go ahead.
Oh, anyone have questions?
I don't see any questions coming. Here's one from Laura. What do you use to capture current happenings? I've tried to carry notebooks, use iPhone notes, etc., but just seem to forget.
Well, Well, now, of course, I don't have as much time to write as much as I used to, because I used to write like hours, sometimes some days, but I still am just a hand journaler. And now it's just like capturing choice details, right? But I do go back and look through my journals and find those little seeds and moments to begin essays in the future. Yeah, I'm not the most organized person, but just lots of notebooks. And then I'll go back later and I'll highlight and I'll mark pages so that the next time I go back, I only have to look at the highlighted pages, right? Stages.
That's great. Greta says, did you talk about the cover art? So fitting.
Yeah. So she writes, gave me several covers to pick from, and this one just so resonated. And obviously, there's a lot of different ways one could interpret it. Obviously, the red and gold is very Chinese, but I loved that there was this circular image that could be seen as many things. It's like a seal, but also it feels like, like wholeness, like searching for wholeness. And then these black strokes kind of evoke for me not only Chinese calligraphy, but also this sense of like roots and like dark underlying stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then in the back here, I made sure that they put this heart character, the heart radical, because originally I thought I have to have the heart radical on my cover, right? And they didn't give that to me as a choice, but I loved it so much I didn't care. But I was like, we got to at least get it right there. So, and in the book too, for these in between.
Yeah, I really like that. I'm not sure if it's pronounced Agata.
Yeah.
Thank you for another beautiful reading, Anne. There's such intimacy in your readings.
Thank you for coming, Agata. And then I see in the Q&A, Heidi asked, did your grandma ever tell you more about the sadness in her life, things that happened to her? A little bit, but when I tried to interview her and ask her about her life, she would get very flustered and defensive. And I just think there was so much trauma there that she couldn't return to it. She always resisted saying much.
Mm-hmm.
So not a lot. Yeah. In the same chapter, I write about how she said, she said to me once, like, I've never been to China. Like she said that. And what she meant was I've never been back.
Mm-hmm.
But it was so fitting, is so representative of how kind of that was like a whole nother blocked off sort of world for her, I believe. Like fleeing the mainland.
And then that piece, just being interconnected, where she might be fleeing and you're running towards, because your path is saying go towards, so it's going to bring things up.
Yeah.
And things that others, need to deal with in their own way, but you're also running towards what you need to discover, explore, and in that intimacy that happens when we're all following our own path, but there's these points of overlap that can get uncomfortable at times too.
Right. Because it's her story, and yet I'm inheriting that story, right? I'm inheriting the silences, and I'm very aware of that. It's like I'm more aware of those silences than I am of the actual stories, because not a lot has been passed down, the actual stories of my ancestors. But I feel like I'm in a process of reconnecting to the silences and reopening myself to what I know and what I can connect to through even just paying attention to my dreams more again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Kitty.
Any other questions? Thank you all for being here. This has been great.
Yeah. So happy to do this with you.
Yeah.
That was a beautiful conversation
Thank
between
you.
the two of you. I've so enjoyed listening to you both, and thank you so much for doing this and agreeing to come to Browsers for this. And I do want to tell the audience that we are recording this and it will be up on YouTube tomorrow morning. And you can share this event far and wide with anyone that you want to have listened to this. And so thank you again, Anne, for writing such a beautiful book. I'm excited about the album. That sounds so beautiful and cool. I mean,
Midlife reinvention.
oh, absolutely. That's fantastic. I mean, I don't know. Do you have any samples anywhere that we could like link to on the?
We're trying to get something out by Christmas.
Okay.
Not quite ready.
Well, please share with me as well, because that sounds amazing. So, and then for our readers here tonight, we do have signed copies in the store and you can order online as well, browsersolympia.com. So thank you. Anything else that you want to say before we go?
Just want to say thank you so much to you, Andrea, to you, Stacy, and to everyone for being there. It means so much to me to see your names and from all these facets of my life. So
yes, what a beautiful conversation. Thank you so much to both of you. And thank you all for attending too. So,
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
good night.
Bye.